Hi, I'm Jim Hayden. For about 10 years, I was the producer and director of In Focus with Pat Giuliano. As you probably all know, we lost Pat a couple months ago, and we were trying to figure out what to do. And we finally decided, with all of us sitting down together, that we'd continue on with the show. And I volunteered to be the host. So we're going to keep a lot of the same things that we did with Pat. We're hopefully going to approach things with a little bit of sense of humor. And we're going to talk about things that make life in Methuen a little different. Some of the things that are available, some of the groups that are around, some of the sites that are around. But we're also going to take the show on the road every now and then. And today's show is one of those. We decided to take a little ride just up the road to Exeter, New Hampshire, and we sat down and visited with Julie Williams from the American Independence Museum. And we hope you enjoy the visit. I'm here at the American Independence Museum in Exeter, New Hampshire with Julie Hall Williams, who's the executive director. And thank you for coming on In Focus.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim.
So, big question. Why is the American Independence Museum in Exeter, New Hampshire, and not in Philadelphia or in Washington, D.C.?
That's a great question. In fact, the American Independence Museum is the only museum currently right now that's solely devoted to the struggle for American independence. They're currently building one in Philadelphia, but it's not yet open, so we get to hold that title for just a little bit longer. But the reason why it's here is because New Hampshire was actually pretty critical in the role of the founding of our nation. And the Ladd-Gilman House, which is one of the two buildings a part of the museum, was a hotbed for Revolutionary War, the beginnings of the Revolutionary War here in northern New England at the time. The man who lived in the house, Nicholas Gilman Sr., was the state treasurer. Okay. Exeter was the capital of New Hampshire at the time. So there was a lot going on here, to say the least.
So this was the Revolutionary War capital of New Hampshire?
Yes, okay. That's what we do call it, basically because for a number of reasons. One being it was the capital of New Hampshire at the time during the Revolutionary War period, but also because the family that lived in the Ladd-Gilman house, the Gilman family, played so many roles into the founding of our nation, and they were at the center of the town of Exeter at the time. Nicholas Gilman Sr. being the treasurer, the state treasurer for New Hampshire, but also their eldest son, John Taylor Gilman. He later served 14 years as governor of the state of New Hampshire. But at the time of the Revolution, he was quite involved and active as a patriot here in Exeter. And he was best known for reading the Declaration of Independence out loud to the Exeter townspeople at the tender age of 22.
Oh, wow. And now that would have been treasonous, right, to do that?
Definitely treasonous. Okay. It was July 16th, 1776 when he read that declaration out to the townspeople. And at that time, many, I think, New Englanders take for granted what that really meant. We were already fighting. Bunker Hill had already happened. People were already off to war, and a lot of New Hampshire's militiamen had went and were already serving. But the rest of our forming nation was still coming to grips with whether they were a patriot fighting for this independence or whether they were to remain loyal to King George III. And there were yet still another group of people who were undecided. So that's where that famous phrase, a third comes from.
Right, that John Adams came up with, yeah.
And at that time, it was a third. And here John Taylor Gilman was at 22, going at an act of treason against the king, reading this declaration aloud to the townspeople.
Wow. Oh, pretty gutsy. So, what's the history of the museum? I mean, we have this. You have this great building. You actually have two buildings. We're actually sitting right now with this interview in Folsom Tavern, which is we'll talk about in a little bit later. But what's kind of the history of the museum? How did it get started as a museum? You said it was a house and everything for the home for this family. And so, take us through kind of a little bit of the history of the house. Sure.
Well, the house was the Ladd-Gilman house was built in 1721 by the Ladd family, and over time the Gilmans also moved in and took ownership, and it was quite a hotbed during the Revolutionary War period, as I explained, but then continued to be the governor's mansion. As I also explained, John Taylor Gilman became governor of the state of New Hampshire, serving for 14 years. So he's the longest serving governor still to this day in New Hampshire. After the Gilman family, it passed to private hands. I think it was a popular town physician's home. And then in the early 20th century, it was purchased by the Society of the Cincinnati, New Hampshire chapter. And the Society is is the nation's oldest veterans organization. And basically, the Society has 14 chapters, one for each of the original 13 colonies, and one as well for France, because France was so helpful
allies, yes.
during the war. And they were founded on the principles that they wanted to celebrate and remember and educate everyone about the struggle that it took to form our nation.
Now, who was eligible to be in this society?
Well, at the start of it, it was only officers of the Continental Army.
Okay.
So it was really a privileged section of those who fought for our freedom. Sure. But over time, that has opened up. And basically, if you are a descendant of someone who fought in the Revolutionary War, you can represent your original ancestor and be a society member today.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So now is it owned still by the Society of Cincinnati?
The Society of the Cincinnati New Hampshire chapter. So I said there's those 14 chapters. The New Hampshire chapter bought the building in the early 20th century so it would have a clubhouse.
Oh, neat.
So the reason why you're, not me personally, but let's say if I was a society member, I would be a member of the state that my ancestor fought from.
Oh, okay.
So if my ancestor fought from Virginia, I would be a society member from Virginia, even if I lived in New Hampshire today. So New Hampshire chapter has society members that live all over the country and all over the world. And so the society purchased the Ladd Gilman House basically to create a clubhouse and a meeting point for them to rest and come home and have their annual meetings and to remember and recall and also as a depository of a lot of the historical artifacts that many of the members have collected over the years. So from 1901 or 2 until about the mid-80s, this is how the house existed.
And it wasn't open as a museum then, right? It
wasn't, but I think many people knew that it had a tremendous collection because these society members over the years have donated amazing artifacts to this collection, to their clubhouse. And so it could be accessed by private appointment for tours, but it wasn't a regularly scheduled opened building.
Now, you had something very interesting happen, I guess, in the 1980s.
Yes.
That kind of changed a lot of things with this museum, with this structure, this house.
Yes, very exciting, actually. It's one of those things you hear about on sort of Antiques Roadshow, I guess you could say. And it happened here. Dick Brewster, he was an electrician and a townsperson here in Exeter, as well as a decorated veteran of our country. He was familiar with the Society House and helped out from time to time, and he was up in the attic. Apparently they were working on wiring for a new alarm system or something, and while they were there, they found a box. He opened up the box, found a piece of paper in the box, opened up the piece of paper, and as soon as he started to read Declaration, he immediately folded up and knew that they had something really amazing there. Dick was very well aware of the history of the home, and so he put 2 and 2 together quite quickly. And what ended up happening is they took the Declaration to some great conservators and minds who immediately figured out that it was an original Dunlap broadside copy of the Declaration of Independence.
Now, what does that mean, a broadside of the Declaration?
So what happened was on July 3rd, we remember from our history days, the Committee of Five got together and wrote out the Declaration. And that's pretty much because our country, all the patriots fighting for our freedom, didn't really have a unified reason for it. Everybody had their own personal reasons, but there really was no declaration, if you will, of what it is that they were doing, why they were rebelling.
Sure, sure.
And so a group of individuals got together and wrote up this declaration, and it listed all of the things that the king did. He taxed us, he forced us to have soldiers in our homes, he, it goes on and on and on. And Thomas Jefferson put his final touches on it, had 2 little leaflets of paper with this description, and brought it to a man named John Dunlap on July 3rd. John Dunlap was the printer for the cause at the time in Philadelphia, and he worked through the night into July 4th typesetting this first Declaration of Independence, and he immediately printed off about 150 to 200, we're not sure the exact number, broadsides.
Okay.
And what a broadside means is it's a very large, poster-sized item that is large enough that it could be posted on the side of a building, like the Center's Tavern, or that it could be read aloud to the public, and like John Taylor Gilman did here.
Right.
So the handwritten declaration that everybody thinks about that's in the National Archives in D.C. was actually not the first copy of the Declaration. That wasn't written until weeks later. That wasn't written out. So these Dunlap broadsides are the first original copies of the Declaration of Independence, and only 26 are known to exist today.
So how did it get to New Hampshire? How did this one get up here?
Well, so it's funny because I always like to say there was no email back then. So it was printed on July 4th, and we know it reached Exeter, a copy reached Exeter on July 16th. Because that was the day that John Taylor Gilman, 22-year-old,
so this is what he would have read from, probably.
This is what he would have read from, and we're not sure if the one found in the attic is the actual one that John Taylor Gilman read. But I like to believe that, as we talked about a third, it was a stressful and tenuous time. And Mr. Gilman might have read it aloud to the audience and recognized that this piece of paper was an important document, and he didn't want anyone to destroy it, deface it, burn it.
Right.
So who knows, maybe he did fold it up and put it in the attic, and that's how it's preserved, but we're not sure.
That's really neat. So it's just lucky that it was found up there, and that the person that found it was honest enough to make sure it got into the right hands. And now it's preserved. I know it's not usually here on site. Right. It's usually in, I believe, the State Archives. Is that correct?
It's in a secure location in Boston.
Oh, in Boston.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we wish that it could be here and on site and on view all the time, but our building is not climate controlled, so it doesn't really allow for a safe place for it. But we're working on that now.
So now I know you have facsimiles of it up in the museum and everything. And
yes, and we do bring it out on occasion too, because what's the point if you can't enjoy it? So this year we bring it out on our festival, which will be on July 12th this year, and that's a huge opportunity for people to come and stand within inches of this really important piece of history.
That's neat. Now you also have you have a few other historical artifacts, obviously, but you have another kind of interesting thing relating to the Constitution.
Oh yes, we have 2 draft copies of the United States Constitution. As they were going through the Constitutional Convention, various committees met to discuss various aspects of the Constitution that they were forming. And there were Constitutional Convention members, delegates from all over the colonies or the states at this point. And New Hampshire's delegate was Nicholas Gilman Jr., who also lived in the Ladd Gilman house. And so we have his draft of the Constitution with handwritten notes in the margins where he is revealing for you, all of the struggles and the conversations that they had in the forming of this document that creates our nation. His version is slightly earlier than our second copy, which was owned by Rufus King, who is a delegate from Massachusetts. And the earlier copy, Nicholas's copy, starts off with "We the people of," the state of New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and it lists all of the states.
Okay.
When you get to the later version, it says "We the people of the United States of America." So it's really,
as we all learned from Schoolhouse Rock,
exactly.
right?
That's right. That's right. And you know, anybody can appreciate it by looking at these two together. I mean, it's just
The changes.
And it's really, these pieces of paper speak to you about the way our country was formed, and the decisions, the thoughts that went through the minds of these delegates. So.
That's really neat. Now, you also have another very important piece that a lot of people might overlook. It's just a little piece of cloth.
Right.
And it's kind of faded. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about that little piece of cloth.
It is our Purple Heart. This Purple Heart, it's a very small, hand-stitched on silk with some gold stitching. And it is hard to miss once you really get a focus on it because it's quite compelling and amazing. But George Washington, General George Washington, was the one that created the military badge of merit, which today we know as the Purple Heart.
Right.
But during the Revolutionary War time, he created the Purple Heart, really to be awarded to anyone soldier who had an act of meritorious valor, is really how he described it.
So it was more so than just getting wounded. It wasn't just
about being wounded.
Right.
It was about doing some great heroic act in the battlefield. And as you can imagine, those who fought in the Revolutionary War, it wasn't really very great conditions.
No, it certainly wasn't.
Things were really piecemealed together, so there was no official medal that was handed out. Rather, General George Washington said, it would be something purple worn upon the fabric of the uniform, because basically allowing people to construct one of their own in the field to award. So, and there are 3 that were known to be awarded by George Washington, and only 2 exist today. Wow. And we do have one of them at the museum here.
Now, that was found kind of by mistake too, or by not by mistake, but they didn't expect to find it where they found it.
Another great find for sure. A Society of the Cincinnati, New Hampshire chapter member who was very, very devoted to adding to the collection of the Ladd Gilman House Museum. He found it in a barn in New Hampshire on an old uniform. And it has been reviewed by experts, and the fabric dates back to the time, and so we're pretty confident that it is, in fact, the Purple Heart.
That is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting because I think a lot of people don't even know this museum is here.
Right.
And it certainly had its ups and downs. I mean, it was forced to close a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. And now I think it seems to be coming back with a lot of vibrancy, with a lot more programs and stuff. And we'll talk about the programs in just a few minutes. But tell us a little bit about the building we're in, the Folsom Tavern. This is the other building on the property, and I know this wasn't here originally.
No, this building loves to move around. It's moved around quite a number of times, and it used to be in the center of downtown Exeter, just across from the bandstand. And it was owned by the Folsom family. They really operated it as a tavern. So if you think about taverns, back in the day, it was a central meeting place for townspeople to come to have discussion. Sure. It was also a place for people to stay. And there's records here for so many people sleeping overnight, and you couldn't turn anyone away back then if they needed a place to stay. That even in the attic, there's some carvings in the rafters where at some point there were so many people that they had to stick them up there as well. Wow. So pretty great location. It's also pretty well known for 2 additional items. The New Hampshire chapter of the Society of the Cincinnati was actually founded in this building. Oh, wow. It was founded here because it was the central meeting place in what was then the Capitol. And then later, a number of years later, George Washington came here and had what we call a light coalition, which was a very light breakfast right in our large parlor.
Now that was on the tour that he did through the seacoast and everything in 1789?
That is correct, in November of that year. And Exeter had really prepared, thinking that President George Washington would be here for a big gala event on the evening. So they were going crazy.
Oh, no.
They had, got the streets ready. They had bands ready. They had the tavern ready to be fully decked out for a grand ball for his welcoming. And what happened was he actually strolled into town a number of hours early in the late morning, not in the evening like they had expected.
Oh, no.
So the tavern got it together and served him a light breakfast before he was on his way to Amesbury. And they still had the big celebration afterwards, but he wasn't here for it.
Wow, that's really interesting. Now, there's another figure that is pretty prominent in the founding of the society, as I understand, in New Hampshire, and that's John Sullivan.
Yes. General John Sullivan was the society's first president for the New Hampshire chapter. So remember how we said there's these 14 chapters?
Right.
John Sullivan was the first New Hampshire president, and George Washington was the first general president overseeing all of them.
Oh, okay.
And so John Sullivan is quite remarkable in his own right, and all of his efforts that he had during the Revolutionary War and fighting in the campaigns up north. So he was a great choice to be the first society's president here. And actually a recent acquisition of the museum is a handwritten letter from General George Washington to General John Sullivan, noting about how happy they were about the founding of this New Hampshire chapter of the society. And in the letter, General George Washington writes that he hopes that all of our officers and those who fought could be recognized for their sacrifices.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this building isn't like a lot of the taverns you see around New England. It's a little bit more genteel, it seems like. A lot of them you're used to seeing the bar, with the gated bar that opens and closes, and it's a little bit more rustic, like a drover's tavern type thing. So how did this tavern work? I know there's a bigger room upstairs. I'm assuming that was kind of the tavern room, or? The
assembly room. Well, the room that we're sitting in right now is the small parlor.
Okay.
So this might have been used by the family. It's much less grand. It's smaller as well. And the room where George Washington would have eaten in is the large parlor, much more grand, much more inviting.
Okay.
So this really was a lovely downtown destination and a place to come and stay and have a more political discussion and not so much the rowdy bar.
So you have a lot of people driving animals to Boston and stopping by and things.
Yeah.
So you have some new exhibits this year. You had some interns this winter that created some new exhibits.
Yes.
Just briefly tell us about those.
We had 3 wonderful graduate interns, and one of them created a children's exhibit. So the museum, I have a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, and the museum, I've wanted to bring them here. And last year it was difficult because there's all these historical artifacts everywhere.
Right.
It's kind of a difficult place, but now we've solved that problem. We have this amazing hands-on child-friendly exhibit where kids can try on clothes and the tricorn hat, and they can cook in the hearth, and they can play the games, and they can learn all about the chores and the things that the children back in those days did. So it's an exciting opportunity to open up a whole new world of programming for us. And while the kids they're playing, the parents are also learning as well. So it's really exciting for us. We also have another exhibit on medicine in the Revolutionary War, and this is a must for anybody. It is gory and awesome and amazing, and just to hear about the way things were amputated and the medicine that was used, or medicine, I should say. And I mean, any 12-year-old boy within an 80-mile radius needs to get over here and see this exhibit. So, and our third is, of course, on the Society of the Cincinnati in New Hampshire.
That's neat. So you rely pretty heavily on interns then, too.
We do. We had 3 this winter, and we'll have 8 this summer.
Oh, that's great.
And it really is, the entire effort of the museum is relying heavily on volunteers, period. So interns provide that great back support in terms of research and helping program on a daily basis. all of our tours are volunteer run, and
Oh, that's wonderful.
they're so great. Some of our volunteers have been here for years and years, and some are new just this
Sure.
year. And each of them gives a little bit of a different tour, because they each have their own favorites,
Right.
if you will. So, and they're what makes the museum go round for sure.
Excellent. So you have some events coming up this year.
Yes.
You have, I know, July 4th you're open, and you have a 4th of July celebration here.
We do, and it's amazing. There's not too much going on in downtown Exeter on July 4th, but our museum is open, and this is such a fantastic day to get to learn about your nation's founding. So.
Sure. Okay. And then you have the 24th annual American Independence Festival, and it's going to be July 12th because
Yes.
it corresponds with the reading of the Declaration, not the July 4th celebration.
That's right. We want to remember the day that the Declaration was brought here. So we match up as closely as possible to that. So it is Saturday, July 12th, and it's huge. The whole museum grounds are going to be filled with reenactors. We're going to have the British here as well as some patriots. We have an artisans village with all sorts of, from shoemakers to printers to blacksmith. And down on Swayze Parkway, we have cannons which fire and a battle reenactment. So there's so much to enjoy.
And you're also going to have a surgeon this year, too, I understand.
We're going to have a surgeon with his surgeon's tent. So if you didn't have
Excellent.
enough from the exhibit, you can get more. And our tavern will be a tavern again. We're opening it up.
Oh, that's great.
And we'll have some beer served here as well, and some history of the brewing of beer as well.
Neat. And then you also have other things. You have the Purple Heart Day in August.
Yes, to really celebrate and commemorate that as well. Yeah.
And then you have a lecture, I guess, on New England powder houses, also in August 28th.
Yes.
And we'll actually put a link. We'll put information up with your website and everything,
The
and
calendar.
how people can get a hold of you and see all this, and that'll be on the show. And then you have what sounds like a couple of really neat programs coming up. You have Ghosts at the Museum in October 25th.
That's really fun. We've done Ghosts of the Winter Street Cemetery before, but this year we're going to bring the ghosts to the museum.
That's
and
neat.
so those who lived here will show up
tell
this
their
one day
stories.
only to tell their story.
Oh, that's neat. That's neat. And then you're commemorating the breakfast with General Washington, with George Washington,
Yes.
on November 8th.
Yes, that's right. It'll be the 225th anniversary of
That's
his visit. And so we do want to commemorate that in grand style this year. And we've got some good hoe cake recipes for us to serve.
Oh, excellent. Good Yankee fare.
That's right.
For the Virginian.
And it's a great chance to meet George Washington, too.
Oh, that's great. And then you have you kind of round off the year with a holiday celebration here at the tavern.
Yes.
And I know I was here last year for it, and it was phenomenal. It was your first one, I know, and it was absolutely phenomenal. So, but I want to thank you. This is a very fast half hour. You may have noticed it just flew by, and I really want to thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Jim. It's really great, and we hope that everybody will come out and see what we have here.
Great, thanks. And we hope you join us next time on In Focus.